This is the exact blade I'd tell you to buy if you're cutting plywood and you don't want splintered edges. And it's not the blade most videos push first. We're breaking down what actually stops plywood from tearing out, and why the blade currently in your saw might be the reason your last cut looked rough. The blade is the Diablo D1080X, an 80-tooth ultra-finish blade built for clean cuts in wood, melamine, and veneered plywood. Depending on where you find it, it runs anywhere from around $29 up to about $54. That's the pick. But naming a blade is the easy part. The real question is why this one, and not the $130 blade professional shops swear by, or the high tooth count ultimate finish blade that can actually make your cuts worse. To understand why this blade works, you first have to understand why plywood splinters in the first place. Plywood isn't solid wood. It is built from thin layers of veneer, cross-laminated with the grain alternating in each layer and bonded together with glue. The face veneer, the part you actually see, is thin. On construction-grade plywood, it can be a 1/50th of an inch or less. Even cabinet-grade panels made in the US typically run between about a 32nd and a 38th of an inch, and imported sheets can be thinner still. That veneer has almost no strength of its own. It is the glue bond to the core holding it together. So when a blade cuts through it, two things can go wrong. As teeth exit the material, they push unsupported veneer outward and splinter it. And with a low tooth count blade, there is an actual gap in time between one tooth leaving the cut and the next one entering, a moment where the veneer has zero support. Where the damage shows up depends on the tool. A table saw's blade exits through the top, so the show face needs to be down. A circular saw exits through the bottom, so the show face needs to be up. Get that backwards, and you'll get a clean cut on the side nobody sees, and torn up wood on the side that matters. Cutting across the grain also tears out worse than cutting with it, because the fibers are shorter and break more easily. Not all plywood behaves the same either. Baltic birch, built from more than a dozen thin layers of solid birch veneer in a standard 3/4 inch sheet, tends to cut cleanly, though all that glue between layers can dull a cheap blade fast. Oak plywood has a reputation for splintering, even with a good blade and good technique. So if the veneer is fragile, the obvious fix seems to be add more teeth. More teeth means a smaller bite per tooth and more continuous support for that thin surface. That is the logic behind every box that markets 80 or 100 teeth as the premium option. And here is where I will push back on that logic. I do believe tooth count is the most overrated spec in this entire conversation. A sharp, well-made 40 or 60 tooth blade will outcut a dull, cheap 80 tooth blade every time, because carbide quality and how flat the blade plate is matter just as much as how many teeth are on it. One review site put it plainly: do not assume a higher tooth count automatically means better results. A sharp 40-tooth blade can outperform a cheap 80-tooth one. In fact, a dull, fine-tooth blade will splinter plywood worse than a sharp blade with fewer teeth. Sharpness beats tooth count almost every time. There's real evidence for the downside of chasing tooth count, too. One tester ran an 80-tooth blade through 3/4 inch oak plywood and got a genuinely clean crosscut. But the blade was heavy, prone to binding, and cut so slowly it risked getting pinched and burning the wood. More teeth means less room in each gullet to clear sawdust, which means the blade fights the material instead of slicing through it. That's exactly why you should be suspicious of the bargain blades near the checkout line advertising 150 teeth for next to nothing. One woodworking forum described those blades bluntly as prone to bind, burn, and kick back. For a handheld circular saw specifically, 40 to 60 teeth is the range that actually works, enough to support the veneer without choking the blade on its own sawdust. Tooth shape matters as much as tooth count. Blades with alternating top bevel teeth, angled left and right instead of ground flat, slice through veneer instead of chipping it, which is why that shape is standard on plywood and cross-cut blades. A steeper version of that same angle cuts even cleaner on brittle material, though it dulls faster. The angle of the teeth relative to the material, called hook angle, matters too. A negative or low hook is what's recommended for plywood and melamine because it shears through the material gently instead of aggressively pulling into it. That negative angle approach isn't new either. It traces back to work done at the University of Braunschweig in the 1960s, where engineers developed a carbide tooth with a negative cutting angle specifically to reduce that aggressive, tearing action. By 1969, that geometry showed up in one of the first production saws built around it. The blade in your saw is running on an idea that's close to 60 years old. If this kind of breakdown is useful, hit like and subscribe. It helps more people find the videos that actually explain the why instead of just handing you a link. So if tooth count alone isn't the deciding factor, does that mean you should just buy the most expensive blade available? Not necessarily. On the high end, there's the Forrest Woodworker 2, a thin kerf 10-inch blade that lists for around $134. Forrest has been making blades since 1946. Their blades are resharpenable, and professional shops rely on them because the carbide holds up under daily use. On the value end, there's the Infinity Ultra Smooth for under $70, and the Diablo line, made by Freud, a company that's been building cutting tools out of Udine, Italy, since the early 1960s, and has been owned by Bosch since 2009. Here's my take. I do believe the Diablo D1080X is the honest, best value answer for most people. It's the blade most people actually end up buying, and unless you're running a cabinet shop putting a blade through plywood every day, the Forrest's resharpenable longevity isn't going to pay for itself. You'd be paying for durability most home shops will never fully use. To be fair, it's not a perfect blade. Some buyers report Diablo blades dulling faster than expected, or arriving with a bent tooth, and little response from customer service. No blade in this category has a spotless record, and it's worth knowing that in one independent test of 15 different circular saw blades, a $10 Makita blade actually came out on top overall. This is a category where reasonable people and reasonable tests disagree. Here's the part most blade videos skip entirely. The blade is only half the equation. How you make the cut matters just as much. There's an ongoing debate over the best tool for breaking down plywood sheets in the first place. Some builders are firmly in the track saw camp. One site put it as simply as track saw, and it's not close, because the rubber strip on the guide rail sits right against the cut line and supports the veneer on both sides as the blade passes through. Others point out it's genuinely hard to get repeatable, precisely dimensioned cuts with a track saw the way you can on a table saw. A lot of builders do both. Rough cut sheets, down with a track or circular saw, then finish dimensions on the table saw. A few habits help more than people expect. Running painter's tape over the cut line and pulling it away at an angle afterward holds the surface fibers down while the blade passes through. A zero clearance insert does the same job on a table saw. And feed rate matters more than most people give it credit for. One woodworker found that simply slowing down how fast they pushed material through a Forrest blade dramatically cut down on tear out without changing anything about the blade itself. One more thing worth knowing, because it's brand new. In July of 2025, Diablo announced the Wood Demon Ultimate Finish Blade, a 7¼ inch 60-tooth blade built specifically for handheld circular saws, marketed as bringing table saw level finish quality to a tool usually associated with rougher framing cuts. Diablo is calling it an industry first. I'll flag that the specific performance claims around it are coming from the manufacturer's own announcement and haven't been independently tested yet. So treat those numbers carefully until more people have actually run it through plywood. But it's a sign that even the major manufacturers agree this is a real problem worth solving, specifically for handheld saws, not just table saws in a shop. So here's where all of this lands. If you're forcing me to name one blade for a circular saw, I'd hand most people a Diablo D10 80X class fine finish blade. Pair it with a straight edge or a track for support, and call it done. It's not the most expensive option, and it's not the one with the most teeth on the box. It's the one that balances real cut quality with a price most people are actually willing to pay. But the blade was never the whole story. Understanding why plywood splinters, the thin veneer, the direction of your cut, which face is up, will save you more disappointing cuts than any single blade upgrade will. Pair the right blade with the right technique, and the splintering problem mostly disappears. If this saved you from buying the wrong blade, subscribe. There's a lot more of this kind of breakdown coming.